Welcome, everyone, to a brand new Record Club episode of the Jams Tea podcast, where each week one of us picks a record for everyone else to listen to and review, and then we review it. And this week, we're kicking off the year. It feels a little bit more official now because we don't have the holdover of a month and a half's worth of us not releasing our Thriller record club. So this is like the first record club of the year, kind of, sort of, officially. We're gonna be talking about the final album, well, final question mark album from pop punk emo titans, My Chemical Romance. We're talking about Danger Days, The True Lives of the Fabulous, whatever that stupid title's called.
Flatulent Gay Boys.
Yeah, that one.
You really love to make this as hard to monetize as possible.
We get money from doing this? That's a possibility.
We're here to talk about the fourth My Chemical Romance album, as Jake said. And look, it's a controversial record. And it's interesting to talk about. I'm glad Morgan picked it. It represents an interesting juncture in what I would call, I guess, the renaissance of this band, because the My Chemical Romance have always had an avid fan base of incredibly intense fans ever since they've been around. I mean, they were one of the most popular pop punk bands of the 2000s, but it's really taken a while for, and I'm not saying that their records weren't critically well reviewed, because generally they were as well, but there was, I guess, it wasn't necessarily even about them, but there was this public narrative around the kind of uncoolness of pop punk.
It's the evergreen statement of whatever teenage girls like is deeply reviled and railed against in the public eye.
And that really hung over My Chemical Romance, especially when they went on, their hiatus, especially, I think, exacerbating that. But then the hiatus, in some ways as well, allowed for, with enough silence and no releases, allowed for the perfect conditions for a reassessment of My Chemical Romance. And so over the last 5 years in particular, you've seen more praise and more kind of critical reevaluation of records like Three Cheers for Sweet Revenge, and especially The Black Parade, right? Which is now basically all but agreed across the majority of universal sources to be a kind of like masterpiece, modern concept record, sort of, grand statement, essentially, that never fully got the appropriate respect it deserved. And so the My Chemical Romance reassessment continues now, with them having officially reunited. And we're starting to see, it's not something that I've seen a lot of, but I've certainly seen some whispers of reassessment for their fourth album, Danger Days, probably pretty comfortably their least liked and least well-reviewed record, which is funny because it kind of came at a point where some critics, I guess rock critics in general, were starting to turn back around towards My Chemical Romance, and it ends up being, weirdly enough, one of their most well-reviewed records at the time. But certainly they were so uncool at that point in time, and the pivot was so garish that it definitely left a bad taste in a lot of people's mouths, and is going to take, I think, some more time before people start coming back around on it again. And I think neatly representative of that is that we're all not unified on our particular thoughts on this record. If you're coming here as a huge defender and fan of it, I will say that, I like this record a good amount. I have some very significant reservations about it. But I will be here to fly the flag for it, as I often am for records like this. But
that suck.
And here we go as well. We don't all agree, and we are here to talk about what makes this record controversial in the first place, why so many people did get off the My Chemical Romance train with this, and why people who've come back, who've joined the train, in more recently with records like The Black Parade, have by and large yet to really, see the appeal or feel any kind of attachment to this record, and maybe they never will. But we're here to talk about it, one of the least discussed MCR records, and certainly one that was momentous, I think, for their career.
So this is my record club for this week. I specifically picked it because, well, in part because I think it is an interesting record to dissect, considering the trajectory of this band. And secondly, as a secondary motivation, really, I wanted some revenge for somebody making, I think it was August that made last year's first record club of the year, The Big Day by Chance the Rapper.
That would
And
be myself, yes.
yeah, so I wanted some, you know, revenge is best when it waits.
As the famous proverb goes.
Yeah.
Well, not to mention, I also just like from the outset, if you're trying to pick a record to discuss that is directly antithetical to all the things that August is like a professed fan of, I think this album in particular is like a harbinger of everything that in theory you hate. So I understand the pick there with Morgan.
I get that, but also at the same time, to me, this has so much about it that reminds me of things that August loves. I'm not saying it's as good as those things, and in many respects, I think it fails to achieve what those things do and doesn't quite hit the mark in the way those things do. But I thought a lot of Coheed and Cambria while listening.
Coheed and Cambria, I was definitely thinking of while listening to this. Particularly, I thought some of the later, like there was one song that reminded me almost exactly of the big ballad at the end of I actually have the CD right here because I've been listening to it. Fucking, I'm just up my own tropes, but there's some stuff on here that especially reminds me of like In Keeping Secrets at points when they get into that really melodic stuff, and some of the more ballady stuff is a little kind of like that Light in the Glass.
Yeah, I mean, I think like there's a whole different arena of taste and tastelessness, I guess, that these two different bands are kind of interested in probing. And MCR, of course, have that kind of particular desire to, and I'm not saying they look to diminish their own art in any way in doing this, but they do have this particular desire to make these mass appeal, like huge songs that teenagers are going to want to sing along to. Whereas, you know, Claudio Sanchez, Coheed and Cambria, the Mars Volta, whose later era stuff I also thought of while listening to this, never really had that same desire. They kind of like to flirt with pop tropes and often in the guise of subverting them. But there's so much of the spirit of these kind of like modern day, incredibly manic and hyper prog acts that I thought of spiritually, not so much sonically, but spiritually, and in some of the vocal deliveries, as well as the whole concept album with a narrative and weird, wacky, fantastical characters that Jared is leaning into here.
To me, those comparisons don't really work just because they're comparing elements of both of these bands that feel like neither is the primary venture of either. So it feels like comparing not so much apples and oranges, but it's like tangerines and watermelons. Like, sure, they're both fruit and like, you know, they both have a lot of citric acid in them, but at the same time, they have more differences than they have similarities, at least in my opinion, just because
it's just really difficult to imagine Coheed and Cambria and the Mars Volta making songs like Sing or Planetary. Like, I don't think there's certainly moments on here where like Na 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 or Bulletproof Heart, I can certainly see the Coheed comparison in particular, but this also is a wide.
So it's a very ambitious project, you know.
It covers
got
a lot of ground here.
Parts. Let's start with the concept of this album. Actually, I think that's important to address. This album, it's set in a post-apocalypse, and we're following the fabulous Killjoys, I believe they're called, this kind of united front of rebels rebelling against this big there's like some big corporation.
Better Living Industries, that's it.
Yes, Better Living Industries. And I find the concept myself kind of half-baked, honestly. It's not a particularly exciting or unique or original concept, which is not the end of the world. Let's make that very clear with a record like this. The concept and how well executed or whatever it is not particularly going to be the end of the world. What is going to be the end of the world is what you do with that, because ultimately that's really what matters to this kind of record. So how do you all feel about this lovely My Chemical Romance album?
Well, I'll just kick into gear here because I hate falling in line with consensus on controversial albums because it either one way or the other, because it tends to be the well-worn path of things already said. So I'm going to try and make up for being boring with at least being intense and saying that I think that the front half of this album is as terrible as any band that are as big as MCR have ever made, frankly. Like, this to me is the Saint Anger of pop punk. I find nothing redeemable about the front half of this album. It feels like MCR's style, their intensity, their spirit have all been reduced down to something that is parodic, annoying, polished to the point of garishness. And let it be said that this album is not terrible because it's MCR leaning into their tasteless kind of ventures, because fundamentally MCR have always been a tasteless band. Their entire last album is exactly like this in that respect, and that it's this big, overblown concept album that's them sort of like pushing at the sort of limits of what people would consider tasteful. And in many respects, it has more than one similarity to this, in that its concept is kind of nonsense. Like the whole thing with the Black Parade, like the story of it, the characters, they're all vague and don't matter. Like the core conceit of that album is that it's full of incredible songs that are written well, that are performed with an intensity that even for bands like this are, is scarcely seen. And then you have this, where all of the edges are sanded off, where all of the production is just fucking awful, where you have an intro song like na 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 parenthetical na 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 na, and it just beats this tired ass fucking melody, the and no, I don't care that you put a fucking key change in the second half, because the key change sounds exactly the goddamn same. And then that you get shit like you get shit that follows immediately afterwards, and it is just as annoying, and it sounds so awful. I mean, like, there are parts of this that have like the synthesizers on this album sound like dental tools. They sound like high-pitched, whirring mechanical noises that are being held up right next to your ear. And I think the thing that bothers me the most about this, above all else, is that fundamentally, spiritually, even lyrically, all of this is soulless. And look, I don't care if you want to make the argument that's like, oh, it's like based off this thing that Gerard wrote, and like all these ideas, and I'm sure he put effort into that, and I'm sure that there's love in the construction of it somewhat. But when you like look at these songs, they are fundamentally about almost nothing. They are vague parodies of previous songs that this band have made, and emotions that are obscured either through this production or just flat out fucking incoherent. And the thing is that this band have always been good at the fundamental construction of albums. And one of the reasons the front half of this bothers me like it does is because it's the same fucking song 6 times in a row. There's no variation. You don't get anything in terms of them trying to just spice things up a bit until the back half. And look, the back half is not good. I don't even really think the back half is like passable, honestly. There are a couple moments that I think work well as the least effective, neutered, testicle snipped off form of this band as humanly possible. I think like a song like Party Poison or Save Yourself, I'll Hold Them Back, or the horrifically named Destroya, are songs I don't mind listening to. I don't think the thing is that even the best moments of this album are literally just, hey, do you like Three Cheers for Sweet Revenge, but worse? And that is another problem that this has, is that, again, all of the things that this does well enough, I guess, this band have done well 3 other times on 3 other albums with, better everything. And then I will say there's a song like Summertime, which this gets a pass from me, not just because I think this song is more fully developed, more coherent, less awful sounding, but because there's an emotional through line here that I actually feel. There's nothing here that's obscured. There's nothing here that feels like the band are actively working against their own strengths. It's going for that big, emotional, sincere, earnest bombast. And I think it gets there on a song like this. I don't think that this song is incredible by any means. And again, this is no Disenchanted, but this is still decent. And that's kind of where I come down on this. I think the front half is irredeemable trash. I think the back half has moments that are fine, but overall, I cannot say I blame a single soul for initially receiving this album the way that they did, because God help you if you like the production on this album really cannot be overstated just how fucking awful it sounds. Listening to this, 53 minutes of this is a chore and a half.
I just want to talk about Sing for a second.
Jesus Christ.
What is this American Idol horse shit? No, sincerely, what are you doing? I have a number of issues with the way that Gerard Way often performs these songs. In moments, he's almost sounding like a self-parody, just playing up his most idiosyncratic habits, and it really just becomes insufferable at a certain point. I get that that's a more subjective issue, but here I find this performance inexcusable. The man sounds asleep, and that's fine, because I don't know how you could sing these lyrics and sound excited.
Sing it for the boys. Sing it for the girls. Sing it for
I mean, like, the fact that this album lyrically, I think, is stuck in first gear the whole time is, like, maybe at its worst at this point. And it just kind of, like, do you remember when we reviewed that Panic at the Disco album last year, and I talked about that certain kind of writing that's in this style that feels really pandering to the, the alt teenager crowd, where it's just like, you're so different and we understand you. That's this whole album.
I don't think
and I
anything
hate
here
it.
is as bad as the way Brendan Urie writes.
I mean, I fucking sure, I guess, but
Apples and
all
oranges.
of the
One thing I'll say about Sing is that it's not a highlight here for sure. I don't like the chorus really any more than you guys do. I kind of understand it a little bit more, and I don't quite feel as cynically about it, maybe. I also think that the bridge of this song, when it changes up, I really like what the song does musically, and that kind of bridge moment where it's kind of building towards the final chorus, which again is a bit of a letdown when it arrives, but I think there's a few good ideas here. But it really does feel as though tonally what it goes for with that, I think, calling it American Idol light is not a bad way of actually expressing it. Tonally, what it goes for there feels, and doesn't feel incongruous with the rest of the album, because there is this kind of overall theme of like kind of, it's difficult to express it without just reducing it to cliches, because it kind of is just a series of cliches, really. It's this kind of, rising up anthemic sort of like, empowerment of the youth sort of thing that they go for here. And it is thematically, it's a nice change of pace from the last record, which is so much more dour and so much more concerned with death, and kind of lacking in this sort of, I guess, this more dynamic, optimistic, for lack of a better word, side of Gerard Way. But look, my encapsulation of this is like, I love the idea of this direction for My Chemical Romance. I love the idea of a lot of the things that they try to do aesthetically here and a lot of the direction they try to move in. It's just a case of really flawed execution. And there's moments where it's absolutely unbearable, and I'll commiserate with you on those. And there's moments where I think they almost get there. And there's a few moments that I do just unequivocally think are really good. Not many of them, but they exist. So for me, this is less of a case of complete catastrophe and more of a case of, God, I get it. I see the vision, but there's just so many roadblocks. And I guess I'll express those in a bit, but that's kind of where I'm at the moment.
I actually have a pretty extensive history with this record. My Chemical Romance were one of the first bands that I really fell in love with in seventh or eighth grade, but I've always really struggled with this album. And I've listened to this album a lot, actually, just trying to sort of get on board with it because I was so on board for the first three albums. And I think ultimately so much of this can be forgiven or understood better if the album didn't sound so bad. Like I think the mix of this is unforgivable. It feels like there's no dynamic range. Everything sounds like it is being recorded and played through sheets of paper. It's so thin and lifeless on so much of this. And
Frank Iero, baby, what did they do to you?
are you even here, dude? I mean, I'll give credit for the pretty sick solo at the end of Bulletproof Heart. That was cool.
That is cool, and yet for me, that is the most bad sounding song on the whole record in terms of mix.
Oh
production.
yeah,
it's so awful.
When the fucking screeching noise that's basically constant throughout that entire song. I don't know what it is. It's like this layered over thing. It might just be a compression artifact.
Here's the thing, though, with this whole song is that it sounds like it's trying to be an Andrew WK song. And it even opens with this riff that just sounds like a drunk person trying to play Party Hard. Like, I swear, it feels so weird. Like, is time fucking slowing down? Am I on like 25% speed? It's bizarre how the song starts. And then it just, it keeps that kind of like wall of noise kind of. I mean, I hesitate to call it wall of noise because that's probably not what it's actually going
You're right.
for.
They're kind of, the production styles are kind of similar between Andrew WK and this, and the difference that makes Andrew WK kind of aesthetically bearable is that his whole incredible intense guitar compression thing is just that, whereas here you have that and like 10 other layers of shit that is all kind of blurring into it and making it just this complete illegible blob, and there's nothing you can grab onto there.
And also like Andrew WK songs have hooks in the
there's a few here, but I'll agree. They're pretty
and I'm
weak.
mostly speaking more, instrumentally, like even like in that there's so much like the way he composes tracks is like with that overproduction, that compression in mind, and this feels like it would have just benefited from being a lot more stripped back and a lot more reserved, honestly. And I think it would have been perhaps not amazing, but a better idea.
There's like it's like when I say I get what this is going for, I mean that on many different levels. And one of them is I get sonically what the vision is here, this kind of maximalist, sort of intense, massive, huge thing. And it's just, they go about it in the wrong way to capture that energy. And so much of the energy they're trying to go for, I think, is diluted by this. This just like, it's just so, it's hard for me to describe it, except that it's so 2010. It's just so particular era of like massively intensified studio sheen, just complete, overdone slickness to the point of just complete ugliness. It's
Every rock album was produced like an EDM album, and that's
Yeah.
what this sounds like.
Well, and that, to be honest, I feel like there are moments here where they're kind of deliberately trying to channel a little bit of that kind of, what was currently at that time EDM energy, especially in the ravier elements of this album. Like every so often there's electronical elements and rave elements that peep through, and to be honest, they peep through even on songs that I like, and they're a bit of a confusing element on those. Like my favorite song on the first half, which I will agree with Jake, is definitely the weaker half. But the song I guess enjoy the most, or at least find the most interesting, is Planetary Go. And yet even that has these bizarre electronic elements that just kind of like feel like so completely disorienting. Part of the reason why I enjoy this song though is that to me, and I know I'm going to make eyes roll here, again, not a qualitative comparison, but I just hear so much Cedric Bixler-Zavala and Jared singing on this song. Just this really nasal thing that he goes for.
I mean, that comparison's held water through every MCR album, I think.
Yeah, okay.
So,
Well, I'm glad I'm not alone there. It's weirdly only on that song where I feel that energy come through, but it's just a weird thing, a weird quirk of the delivery there that
combined with the baffling air raid siren synths that are on this fucking song.
Yeah, look, it's a mess for sure, but it's one of the more interesting messes on this first half. And what I will say is I feel like the album kind of okay, so I really enjoy at the risk of eye rolls, I really enjoy the vocal hook on this song. I think the chorus is really, it's not like objectively, up there with, I don't know, fucking Hey Jude or whatever. It's just, I think, a decent MCR hook. And then Party Poison's kind of like the same vocal melody, almost the same kind of hook style, except done slightly better. So that song ends up being a kind of better execution of Planetary. And then I think the record really does settle into a stretch where I feel like MCR kind of getting a better handle on how to match their vision for this direction with some of their strengths. And I think songs like Scarecrow and Save Yourself and Summertime are really, and Kids From Yesterday, which I wish I liked this song more than I did. There's one massive element of this song that completely throws me. I'll get to it in a minute. But that spiritually and like energetically and in the whole kind of sound of it, it feels like, oh yeah, this is the kind of, anthemic it's very cheesy, but it's that kind of anthemic generational thing that I feel like they've been reaching for and haven't been hitting. And so it's both fascinating, compelling, but also frustrating to hear them get closer and closer and closer to the vision of what they're trying to do spiritually and thematically as this album goes on, but still never quite fully get that mark. I will also shout out a lukewarm defense for Vampire Money, though, which is, I think, a really unusual and kind of, at first kind of baffling way of ending the album, but also kind of a song that works well because it's sort of so different to a lot of the rest of the album, and that this is essentially just a Ramones song. And that's a moment where I think the incredibly over the top compression kind of works because it sort of echoes and feels very true to that influence. And so much of this track particularly reminded me of 80s punk and the Ramones in particular. And also I kind of enjoy that it's a weird sort of like diss track against bands that took money to have a song on the Twilight soundtrack, which is such a petty and kind of like dumb thing to write a song about. And it's like so completely
all right,
like,
Watchmen.
Well, yeah, it's also like it has nothing to do with the concept of the rest of this record or anything else that anything on this album is doing.
MCR at this stage of their career they cannot be throwing shade at Paramore and Radiohead. They simply do not have the cachet for that.
Yeah, it's like, sure, the diss itself is weird and misplaced, but the fact that this song is so distinct from the rest of the record thematically, and the energy of it is just so much more sort of simpler. It's not stripped back production wise, but like there's less music happening. It's more just a simple kind of punk pastiche. It makes it end up being, I think, one of the best songs on the record, ironically, for being such a throwaway at the last moment.
Yeah, I mean, I desperately want this record to just be a My Chemical Romance power pop record.
Yeah.
Like, I think they would be really good at that. And you just sort of strip back a lot of what's here and make it sound good. But I think there's really something there And we get to this on songs like Ambulance on the follow-up EPs, collectively known as Conventional Weapons, which is one of my 5 favorite My Chemical Romance songs. And there are shades of that here, but it's just doused in this compression and
Yeah.
overbearing conceptness, I guess, that's like it makes me wonder what's worse, to make something soulless or to make something that had a lot of thought and care and soul into it, but then it sounds soulless. Like, what's more irritating to me?
Well, like, yeah, and the difference here is that, the Conventional Weapons EPs were produced by Brendan O'Brien, who's like a legendary producer for Soundgarden, Pearl Jam, Rage Against the Machine. So there was a deliberate decision there to go in a direction, that basically brings in a tradition of rock music to emphasize what they're doing in a way that, befits their strengths more. Whereas this album is produced by Mr. Rob Cavallo, who, I don't want to, let's human beings, whatever, but not someone who necessarily has the same sort of pedigree, or at the very least, like, produces that kind of music. Like, he's kind of fitting for what they're doing here because he's produced for Green Day, and Green Day are a heavy influence here, I think, as well.
Yeah, like this reminds me a lot of 21st Century Breakdown.
Yeah.
In a stunning number of ways. They are both these overambitious concept albums.
I think an album that Butch Vig was working on, probably because Cavallo was working on this record, because I think these were the same year, both 2009.
They were released a year apart, but they were probably
I keep forgetting this is 2010.
They probably would have had some overlap in terms of like recording and production. So I think there's
Rob Cavallo
there.
Was work, and to be fair to him as well, he's produced like records for Paramore as well. Like, it's not about him as a person, it's just about the aesthetics that he's recruited for. But he was producing this around the same time as he was also producing Meatloaf's late career opus Hang Cool Teddy Bear, if anyone remembers that, and also the debut album of Mr. Adam Lambert. So this is telling you a lot about like weird pop rock and sort of that sort of whole scene was at this particular
Adam Lambert, American Idol.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
And I mean, like, I think producers are a lot like cinematographers in that they can have the most wildly varied, both in substance and quality, kind of careers, because they are still at the behest of their directors or their band at the end of the day.
Yeah, my whole thing with bringing them up is not to mock the producers, but just to say, like, the band chose to recruit this producer for this project and this producer for this project. And that, I think, gives you a little bit of an insight into what they're kind of going for.
I think Rob Cavallo's done some really great stuff. I mean, he's been with Green Day since Dookie. He produced that record, that Insomniac, pretty much everything up until and including American Idiot sounds pretty great, even if it's a little cleaner than it should be in some spots. But, not an untalented producer, I don't think. There's so many decisions here that were made that task me.
I imagine made so much sense from a production standpoint with the aesthetics of the time in 2010. But now we have some distance from that, and it's just like so much of the sound of that era, and it was a sound that everyone was chasing, and it was a sound that everyone was loving. We look back at it now and it's just mystifying.
And it's such a weird fit for this band because, I mean, especially when you listen to this, like something like Three Cheers, a fundamentally edgy and sort of grimy band. And then they make this record with all of the edge sanded off, even if they're not like sellouts or anything, but evidently they just chose to take their sound in a direction that is more, I mean, I don't even know if I want to say like marketable, but just like it's just so much less. I feel like there's so much less here than there is on previous records, even if the runtime is pretty much the same.
Well, and that's the thing, like one of the MCR's greatest strengths is their hook writing, in their prime era. And that's just less of a focus for Jared Way here. And you can tell that because while I don't think some hooks are bad, but I think that most of the hooks on these songs are serviceable. It's just that also most of the hooks on these songs are kind of just carbon copies. And so they're not really trying to make these songs feel distinct in any way, at least. And to be fair, I guess the songs on their last record before this weren't all that distinct either, but that's a whole different thing. Basically, I think that Jared has put more thought into the concept and the writing and basically his ideas here than how to translate those into compelling musical expressions, because they had that balance so good on the Black Parade, right? That record's so lyrically dense, thematically dense. It really feels like a journey through, all the different places emotionally that album is taking you. And here it's like, with all the characters and with the fucking comic book that came out alongside it and all this wide vision of it, it feels like so much has gone into trying to build that world up that ultimately less time has been given, less focus has been given, less polish has been given to actually how this is experienced as a piece of music apart from all of the dressing,
Yeah, that actually is another point of comparison for Coheed that I hadn't considered, is the comic book accompaniment that actually has to tell their story that they start telling here.
One thing I can speak on is having not been familiar with My Chemical Romance. That's not really the right word, but I've never really engaged with My Chemical Romance in a formal way. I mean, I've obviously been aware of them. They're a fucking huge band, and Black Parade's still a celebrated record. So listening to this was like, I don't know, this album just sounds like what you imagine this band is if you just are not engaged with culture. It just sounds like how it feels like the stereotypical platonic ideal of like, oh, big dumb rock band popular with 14-year-old girls. Like it's so bizarre.
Hot Topic, emo teenager
Hot Topic
core
ass fucking record. It's so bizarre. It feels exactly like that. And
I
mean,
tweeted last night that this album sounds like Tumblr, and I think that's the best way you can possibly get that idea
that's
across.
a good way of summating it, because it's bizarre. Like, you hear people, I've heard so much good things said about this band, and I just cannot. It's tough to fathom, because this is such a mess, a sloppy.
Well, to be fair, you're listening to their widely most disliked album.
I mean,
yes.
True. I'm well aware of that. I'm just making the point that there's going to be people who have been exposed to this band through this album. I mean, I remember Na 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 being played in a ton of like trailers.
Ooh, suck it to the rebel.
Yeah, but that song was used in like a ton of trailers. That, I mean, fucking obnoxious hook, I remember.
A lot of this music feels like it was written specifically to soundtrack trailers.
Yeah, it sounds like this, like you could put this over like an animated kids film or edgy kind of Twilight kind of thing. It just feels
Irony.
so
Well, and look,
strange.
A good way, I think, of summing up the misfire that this is that, like, it's the first time in their career, I think, that MCR don't sound ahead of the curve, and in fact sound like they're trying to catch up on something. Because I think what makes their first record is, your bog standard, pop punk debut, your favorite weapon type thing, and it's good. It's a decent album. But their second and third records, why those are so beloved, is because they're taking and they're working within the aesthetics of pop punk, but they're doing things that feel like they're advancing that genre in really fascinating and interesting ways and taking it into more ambitious spaces. So they're interesting albums because they feel like they're actually pushing the genre forward in some way. Not that every band has to do that to be great, but it is something that defined the greatness of MCR, is that they gave you that pop punk sound that you could get from 500 other bands, but they gave you it in this whole package that was so much more than those other bands ever bothered to try and do. You know what I mean? And whereas with this record, it's kind of like, here they're trying to do the sort of thing that like the bands I mentioned at the start of this, way back in the start of the 2000s, were doing, and trying to combine that with what they're good at, but it just ends up being a kind of hodgepodge where they don't quite have the technicality, the skill, or even the scale to their ambitions musically to pull it off very much at all. And so it ends up feeling like a retreat, even though I think they are trying to do something different and to do something progressive. It's just that they don't quite have, whether it's the skill or the panache or even the time to be able to realize the vision. It just feels like a complete stumble. And I say this as someone who does like a good amount of the songs on this record, just nowhere near as much as I like the songs on the 2 records that precede it. And also with the caveat consistently that my enjoyment has this ceiling, that is there because of all the roadblocks essentially that this band, whether probably inadvertently, I assume, have ended up putting in there, getting in the way of what they're actually good at, getting in the way of their actual strengths. And maybe the most egregious example of this for me, one of the most mystifying musical decisions on this entire album, because it completely kneecaps a song that I think otherwise I would be able to enjoy a lot more. The Kids from Yesterday. Please, someone tell me why on earth the fucking snare sound from Joy Division's She's Lost Control is in every second of this song. And
it is so funny.
Like, go if you immediately know what I'm talking about, go and listen to the first few seconds of both songs back to back. It is the exact same snare sound, and it is completely incongruous in this song.
Bum.
Why are you having this fucking 70s post-punk cold wave reverbed, industrial synth sound and a song that is basically, the pop punk equivalent of Kids in America? Like, what is the vision here? I don't get it at all. And I like the core of the song. I think it's anthemic. I think it's catchy. It's cheesy, but it reminds me of my childhood. And yet you have this fucking, it's like, it's the same sort of thing. I don't want to make this comparison too much but like, it's the Saint Anger thing where it's like, okay, Saint Anger is not good because there's just like, even if you take away the snares and that, everything else still sounds like shit. But like, it's this weird mystifying thing where this one element makes no sense with anything else that's surrounding it. And while you're listening to it, you're so distracted by it that you cannot process anything else the song is doing. And it could just be a me thing.
Yeah.
No,
like I 100% agree with you. I absolutely think this is on the more tolerable end of the songs on this record. It is just that when I'm listening to this, I am laughing because of this fucking snare sound. Just kind of like, why is this here on your overproduced rock opera album?
It makes no sense to me at all.
This is probably still my favorite song on the album, because I really liked it when I was younger. It was one of the few that I really gravitated towards then. And in almost every sense, why does it sound like this? Why?
Yeah.
What is wrong with you, Rob Cavallo, you criminal?
Yeah, thinking about it some more, I think maybe another one of the reasons why, so many fans of MCR at the time were completely turned off by this record is because of, aside from the way it sounds production-wise, it is just such a, especially aside from that, because, what 13-year-old gives a shit or even notices that most of the time? But like, aside from that, it's just such a tonal shift for them into something that is so much less friendly to angsty teenagers. Because this is a record that wants you to, have hope and fight and unify and do all these things, but it doesn't aesthetically match any of the troubled darkness that has come to define them and that made so many people fans of them. It is a real change of tonal pace with that. And so I can understand why Morgan, for instance, if seeing as you were such a long time fan of them, if you get on board with their earlier stuff and you come to this, it sounds like, and maybe this is true, maybe it isn't. I want to give them the benefit of the doubt, but it sounds like a weird, like selling out almost. Like it sounds like a cash-in. And again, I don't want to believe that that is what it is, especially because of the whole theme of vampire money and all that sort of stuff. But and the other themes of this record, they're like very anti-commercialization in America and anti-corporate and all that sort of stuff. There's a disgusting irony, ultimately, to the way the record fails for reasons that end up feeling like it is doing something totally antithetical to what it stands for. And I'm not offended by the album's failure in this regard. It just really does hamper it.
Well, if only it succeeded in being like, this, again, like we mentioned Meatloaf earlier. It could have gone for this, and then it would be an album that I think is like due for reevaluation, at least in spirit anyway, because like the idea of being this big, loud, inspiring kind of anthemic rock thing is just like, I can understand why that would be poorly received at the time, but if it was ideally done correctly, if all their ducks were in a row, if everything was more unified, I could see why people could come back to this and just be like, yes, I see the vision now. It was just a change of pace at the time. But the thing is that it stumbles over itself every step of the way in trying to be that thing that, if it was that thing, I feel like I speak for all of us when I say that we would enjoy that immensely and have enjoyed records like that immensely in the past. But like with the Green Day album that we talked about 2 years ago, Jesus Christ, like that album, it fundamentally has such a blatant disregard for its construction as an album, as a listening single experience, that I feel like their other records are baseline really great at. Just because as somebody who's had a little bit more distance from the band over the years, I feel like the biggest issue that they've always had is their production. I feel like you can feel any type of way about any of these records and how they produce and how they sound. I think that the Black Parade, for instance, is basically like the apex of it, just not having any like that many production issues, even though the version that's on streaming sounds like dog shit. They have misapplications of their aesthetic, I think, that feel like if you just corrected this tiny little itty bitty choice, everything here would be better. And this is like that problem blown up to a huge extent.
And it's like, I'm reminded again of their comeback single from last year, Foundations of Decay, which musically, I thought was a fucking fantastic direction for them, like going down this more ambitious sort of post-hardcore route. This is the kind of musical evolution you'd want from a band like this at that stage in their career. And then you listen to the song and it's just so brick-walled and it's just,
mixed like anus.
And I get it. For a lot of people, most people don't care about that and maybe don't even notice it. But I mean, we got to be honest to what we experience, and it's just so distracting. And just my last tangent on this album, the last band comparison I want to make, and definitely I think a least offensive one, or at least controversial one, the band I thought of at certain moments on this, you're in me like a fucking tumor right now. It was specifically in the song Summertime, which I think we can maybe all agree is one of the highlights of this record, right? Probably because it's the closest to like an indie rock song on this album. But this is where I was kind of reminded of the Killers, and specifically what they were doing around Day and Age into Battleborn era, which is definitely not their best era, but also like an era I have a complicated emotions about, because I have a weird nostalgia to a lot of the big singles from those eras because I experienced them at a formative time. And so I end up feeling a weirdly similar way about this album as I do about that kind of darker middle period for the Killers, where they were like really focused on that kind of like, trying to be this Jim Steinman-esque massive anthemic Americana rock band. And there are moments here where I think MCR go for that in spirit more so than sound, but then again, Summertime is definitely a sonic moment. And maybe it's just like, it feels refreshing to hear that aesthetic through that lens at that particular point in the record, as opposed to through the, incredibly blown out, hyper, just nauseating modern pop sound of the rest of the record. It's just a moment that sticks out to me. And Yeah, I don't really have a thesis for that point. It's just something I have thought of multiple times while listening to this.
Yeah, Battleborn sounds pretty good though.
Yeah, I mean, I'm yes, I agree.
The Killers, Satan's Fingers, and the Hospital Bombers.
The Grillers,
The Thrillers, um,
Michael Jackson.
Cyrus and Jeff.
yeah,
Imagine a guy named like Bike. It's short for Bikel. Bikel
Travis?
Jackson.
I'd rather
Travis Michael.
imagine.
Ride my
Now little kids ride him.
Cut that.
Oh, that's the most fucked up thing I've laughed at in a minute.
All right, favorite tracks and ratings. Jake, why not you start us out?
What I would say is the only good song on this album, like Head and Shoulders, pretty much is Summertime. And for as many problems as for the one hilarious problem that the Kids from Yesterday has, I will say that is certainly one of the better songs on the album as well. And it just brings me a whole lot of joy because that snare sound is comic gold. I've laughed at that so much harder than I've laughed at the Lars Ulrich snare. It's just so much easier to isolate and be pleased by. And I'll say Party Poison. That's as close as one of the bangery tracks gets on here to being pretty enjoyable. Least favorite song, honestly, I gotta go with, for as much as as decent as that guitar part at the end is, I gotta go with Bulletproof Heart, just because every fucking lyric on this song is a fucking cliche. Everything on here sounds like it's written on the back of a Hot Topic bumper sticker. It's so fucking it just makes me feel ick.
These are some of the most Killers-esque lyrics on the album, to be fair, actually. Lots of lyrics about running away and let's blow a hole in this town and you know,
yeah, it's very
gravity and yeah.
It's when you're making me think of the soundtrack to Wicked. Nope, I'll pass. 3 out of 10.
August.
Yeah. So my favorite tracks on here, you know what, I'd have to say Party Poison. It's like the observation for me is cute enough that I can let it slide. Yeah, I'm basically picking exclusively stuff from the back half, and I'm trying to not. I'll just say Summertime because it's like sure, and I don't know.
Yeah,
Destroya is like, I don't find it unbearable. The name's unbearable.
I just think of the kaiju. I think
that's
of the
what
kaiju
I think of
every
too.
single time. Destroyer.
I'm fully on board. I'm fully on board with Destroyer until it gets to the chorus hook. Until it gets to the part where he actually starts saying Destroyer. Like,
yeah, no.
Up until that point, it's solid, and then that hits, and
Yeah, and no, it should be stated we are picking favorites with many reservations, of course. So that's that. Least favorite thing is definitely going to be Na Na Na. If only. Why? Why was that what you led with? In what universe?
So bizarre to me that this is like by far the highest rated song on the album on Rate Your Music as well. I don't mind. I don't hate it. It's just funny that this is the one.
What is happening? What is going on? Democrats are giving Na 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 a high rating on Rate Your Music. They didn't used to do this. This is brand new.
Tucker Carlson.
It's a really good impersonation.
And if you like that today, you can expect a lot more of that tomorrow.
Because that's what we do now.
But yeah, I don't know, 4 out of 10. This sucked.
Yeah, I only have one favorite track. It's the Kids from Yesterday. 3 least favorites: Sing, Na Na Na, and The Only Hope for Me Is You, which is maybe the most anodyne song ever created.
That song is not good. Agreed. I don't like that song. It's so grating.
It's fucking sex pest core.
Poor Gerard.
We do love you, Gerard. We promise.
And that's really more indicative of the Warped Tour miasma.
You know, this may age horribly, but you know, he's so far like the most the most what's the right word here? He's like the least sex pest.
The least canceled.
Yeah.
He's like
The
so
least
far
cancelled.
he's been like, if you think about everyone, especially popular bands from this era in this particular niche, you know, Jared Way is like, he might as well be Jesus Christ at this point.
I think that the only reason Brendan Urie hasn't been canceled is because he's too boring.
He's really like the Eddie Vedder of his day, except instead of dying, it's being canceled.
Danger Days, 2.5 out of 10.
All right.
Fair enough.
Now, look, I do like this record. You know, it's a baseline level, and all of the things that I've said about what hampers it, I truly do believe. But I enjoy this in a nostalgic way, and I think that there is a solid baseline here that provides me with enough moments of enjoyment for me not to feel that this is a terrible album or even a bad album. It's just a misguided and misapplied one. And like I said, it's kind of like, I see the vision, it's just flawed in execution. So my favorite songs are Planetary, Go, Scarecrow, and Summertime. We're closely followed by Party Poison and Kids from Yesterday, Joy Division, Snare, and all. My least favorite songs on this record, definitely, I agree with Jake. I think the worst here is Bulletproof Heart. It's just a complete catastrophe musically. And that fucking, it feels like I have tinnitus. It feels like something in my brain is going to explode when I'm listening to that song. It's just appalling. That is definitely one of the worst. I mean, we didn't even talk about the absolutely fucking mystifying. We didn't talk about the interludes and the kind of guest vocals at all, because it's such a like barely even attempted bit of like album structuring to have those
Radio
little
DJ. I'm
Like,
a
it's
guy
like-
and I'm gonna say things.
He's there like 3 times, and it's, you know, it feels like at the beginning, it feels like that was part of the whole concept, to have him be there weaving in and out, and then they kind of just sort of started doing it, realized how much it disrupted the album, and just kind of stopped and weirdly left them in. And then, of course, the most egregious example there being Goodnight Dr. Death, which starts with that, and then has you listen to fucking bass boosted Star Spangled Banner for like 2 minutes. Just what the fuck is happening here? Just what on earth? So Bulletproof Heart, Only Hope for Me Is You, and Goodnight Dr. Death are the weakest moments here overall. Singers,
Dr. Death.
yeah, Singer's pretty not great, but I do like the bridge. I do genuinely like the bridge in that song. So yeah, my rating overall is a 5.5 for My Chemical Romance's Danger Days, which gives us overall an average of 3.8 for My Chemical Romance's Danger Days, The Sex Lives of the Potato Men. Anyway, let us know what you think at home of My Chemical Romance's 4th album. Obviously, we leaned and skewed feeling negative here, but hey, you might be a big defender of this. It might be an album that you really, really love. And if you do, we want to hear from you. We want to hear why you love it, or why you hate it, or why you feel the way you do in the comments below. We love hearing alternate perspectives. We go a little bit hard in sometimes against albums like this, but we do genuinely like seeing when people can make an argument for something that they feel has been done a little bit, you know, injustice maybe. So we want to hear from you in the comments below if that's what you think. If you enjoyed this video, please consider giving it a like and subscribing to the channel if you have not already. We do these kinds of reviews every week, and it's a lot of fun, and we'd love to have you join us. If you want to become a member of the Jams and Tea family, you can hit the join button, and for just $1 a month, you can get your name featured in the title call of every video on this channel. Plus, if you want to recommend us some music to listen to and talk about, your recommendation will go to the top of the pile. August, when you're ready, do you want to give us an outro?
As always, folks, rock over London, rock on Chicago. Aflac, we've got you under our wing.